lecture.
Okay. Thank you so much. A very good afternoon to everybody there. Today we are going to talk about Noor Sepehir, and when we say Noor Sepehir, we know the author is Amir Khusro, and I'll divide this lecture into three sections. At first, I'm going to talk about a brief introduction of the author himself, Amir Khusro. Where did he come from? What is his importance in context of Indian literature as such? Then I'm going to talk about the entire book, the Noor Sepehir. As we know, as you people already know, that the third chapter or the third section of that book is in your course, but that book consists of 8 other chapters. So there are 9 chapters. Noor Sepehir. Noor Sepehir means 9 skies. So I'm also briefly in the second section of the lecture going to talk about the other sections of the text that you are looking at, and in the last we're going to discuss the third chapter and what are the important things in that chapter and how that is relevant to your course. So this is how I'm going to frame my lecture, and I'll start with Amir Khusro. When we say Amir Khusro, we need to understand that the basic problem and the basic positive and the most positive point about Amir Khusro is that he is so popular. And the problems that come with that popularity is that A, there are many texts which are wrongly attributed to him because of his popularity, and B, that because of his association to a Sufi background, I'll come to that when I'll introduce him in detail, but he was associated with Chishti Sufis, and because of that Sufi association, many superstitious stories are also associated with Amir Khusro. So that is the problem with the author that we're dealing with. And in the terms of Professor Irfan Habib, the versatility and the diversity of Amir Khusro was, according to him, a very major flaw of his. So let's not go into those details. That was just a brief overview that you have, because we hear Amir Khusro every now and then in every popular songs, lyrics, everywhere. So he is everywhere, but what was he historically? Who was he historically? We need to look at that, and we need to contextualize him and place him in the late 13th and the 14th century of Indian history that we are looking at, because that is the time period where he worked and lived. And we need to understand that time, because that time is a time of mingling of cultures, and in Amir Khusro's personality, we see that mingling of cultures coming out very clearly. So in a way, we can say that he is a personification of a cultural assimilation that was going on in India of the late 13th and the early 14th centuries, because Turks have come, they have been here for around 100 years now, or more than 100 years. We know 1192 was the coming of Turks to Indian subcontinent, and after having come here, the Turks have now established themselves, and there's a cultural mingling and the cultural assimilation that is going on, and Amir Khusro is a personification of that cultural interaction, which was the need of the hour, because there were two different diverse, versatile cultures, and they were coming in contact, very strong cultures, and they were coming in contact, and what did it produce? So that is a major context in which we need to look at Amir Khusro, and also in context of language. When we look at Amir Khusro, we need to understand that he was an innovator of sorts. Today we are going to look at a text which was composed in Persian, Farsi. But apart from that, he also did a lot of innovations in his work. He coupled Farsi couplets with Hindavi or Braj Bhasha couplets. When I say Braj Bhasha, I mean the language spoken by the North Indian belt. He calls, when we come to that, we'll understand. When he says Hinduvi or Hindavi, he does not mean Hindi or specifically a language of North India. When he says Hindavi, he means all the languages spoken east of the river Indus. So for him, Hindavi includes Kashmiri, Hindavi includes Tamil. So that is a range that he's looking at. But when he is composing his verses, for example, there is this very popular also, but a very famous text of his, Zihale Miskin, Makun Tagaful, Burai Naina Banaye Batiyan. So the first line or the first what do you say, the first line of the couplet is in Persian, and the second line of the couplet is in Braj, or the northern Indian language. So that is a kind of assimilation or mingling that Amir Khusro was doing in language. So this was a very innovative thing that he was doing, and it is because of this innovation that he was doing with merging Persian with Hindavi or with Braj Bhasha that he has been, given the title of father of Urdu at times, which can be contested because Urdu is a much later development. But in 13th century, he was already experimenting with merging the Persian verses with the Braj Bhasha or Hindavi language verses. So this is what we need to know when we need to understand the importance or context of Amir Khusro. Now I'll briefly look at what was the historical background of his life. He wrote many texts. Those texts belong to a vast variety of genre. Some were Fatahnama. Fatahnama means victory stories. So they like talked about the victories of certain kings and certain monarchs. There were other texts like there were Tarikh. Tarikh means history. So he composed history, not in the modern context, not history in the modern context, but of his time. He wrote Diwan. Diwan is a collection of verses, and then he wrote Masnavis. Masnavis are technically long poems which are composed in rhyming couplets. So that is how we define Masnavi, a very long poem with a rhyming couplet with rhyme scheme of AA, BB, and CC. You people are literature students. You people would know that better than I do. So that is it. And the text that we are looking at, Noah Sepehir, is also a Masnavi. Okay. Now, who was Amir Khusro and why is he relevant? He was a son of a migrant Turk. His father, Saifuddin, had migrated from Central Asia and had come and settled in Patiali in Etah in Uttar Pradesh itself, and that is where Amir Khusro was born and brought up. His father died soon after his sometime after his birth, and he was brought up by his maternal grandfather, who was Imadul Mulk, and he served at the court of Ghayazuddin. He served at the court of Ghayazuddin Balban, and he was given the title of Rawat-e-Arz. Rawat-e-Arz was a military title that was provided to the grandfather of Amir Khusro, under whom he was brought up. And Amir Khusro himself joined the services of the royal court. He served many monarchs. He had joined the service under Balban's time. During Balban's time, he joined Malik Chhajju, who was a subordinate of Balban, but eventually he moved up in the latter and was serving the monarch. He was writing poetry and he was writing history for the monarchs of the Delhi Sultans, of the Delhi Sultanate. And the interesting part about him is that he had served around 7 rulers, and all of these rulers had a tussle with each other, but none of them had a tussle with Amir Khusro. So he knew how to praise and how to survive in a cutthroat, courtly culture. Because to take an example, there is a Masnavi composed by Amir Khusro by the name Ashiqa, which is a love story of Khizr Khan and Dul Rani. Khizr Khan was the son of Alauddin Khilji, the eldest son of Alauddin Khilji, who was murdered by his younger brother Mubarak Shah, for whom he had written this Noah Sepehir. Noah Sepehir was dedicated to Mubarak Shah, and he served both these people who were at each other's throat very nicely and very cleverly in that sense. So Amir Khusro knew how to survive court politics, and this is what he did. Apart from that, another important aspect of his life was his dedication to Nizamuddin Auliya. Nizamuddin Auliya was a Chishti saint. He lived in Delhi, and Amir Khusro was his disciple. He was not his Khalifa. Khalifa means successor, but he was a very major disciple of Nizamuddin Auliya. And he was also given the title of Turk-e Allah, or the Turk of God, which is usually understood to be the warrior of God by his peer, by his guru, Nizamuddin Auliya. This is briefly his life history, and now we'll look at the works that he did. I have already discussed with you about the various genres in which he wrote. He wrote Fatehnamas, he wrote Masnavis, he wrote Tarif. The first Masnavi that he composed was Qiranus Sadain. Oh, thank you so much. I'll slow down, sorry. The first Masnavi that he wrote was Qiranus Sadain, which translates to conjunction of two stars. This text was in dedication to Balban, and it was a commemoration of meeting of Balban, the Delhi Sultan, with his son, who was, they have fallen apart, and that meeting was depicted in this and was, written about in this work known as Qiranus Sadain. Apart from that, he wrote another Masnavi, Miftahul Futuh, which is about, again, Futuh means victories, from Fateh. So he wrote about the victories of Jalaluddin Khalji. Then he wrote his own diwan. So there are these things that are going on, and eventually in 1318 he wrote the text Noy-e-Sipahir. He wrote many texts before Noy-e-Sipahir, and he wrote many texts after Noy-e-Sipahir, but Noy-e-Sipahir is of concern for us today because that text deals with the third chapter of that text deals with the Indian culture and Indian society and how Amir Khusro looks at it and why is it relevant for Amir Khusro so much. So we'll look at that. But first, we'll look at other chapters and what is the entire composition of the text Noy-e-Sipahir. We know it was composed in 1318. It was dedicated to the Khalji ruler Mubarak Shah, Qutubuddin Mubarak Shah, who ruled from 1316 to 1320, a very short rule. And in this text, he starts with the text and the introduction of the text. He starts with a hum, a naat, and a dedication to his peer Nizamuddin Auliya. Now, in most of the texts composed in medieval era or pre-modern times, there was a dedication to God with which most of the texts of Persian literature started of medieval era. Then there was a dedication to the Prophet, the next in line. And if there was a Sufi person writing the text, then obviously their own guide, their own peer was there. So that is the formula followed in this text as well. A hum, which is dedicated to the God, a naat, dedicated to the Prophet Muhammad, and then a dedication to Nizamuddin Auliya that was done by Amir Khusro. And obviously, if the text is dedicated to an emperor or a ruler, then Amir Khusro cannot miss him out, and that is why the first Sipahir, that is the first chapter. Before going into that, I think I've already told people about this, but I'll repeat it again. Noy-e-Sipahir means 9 skies. According to the astronomical traditions that were current in that time, he understood that there were to be 9 skies, and he wrote this text entitled Noy-e-Sipahir, 9 skies or universes, and he dedicated each chapter or each Sipahir to each sky which were there according to the astronomical calculations or astronomical traditions of the time. The first Sipahir was collaborated or was in conjunction with the highest sky, which was 9th from below. So that was the formula that he applied. The first Sipahir was the 9th sky, the highest, the topmost sky, and then he moved down from first 9th to first. So this was the idea behind Noy-e-Sipahir, and each chapter or each Sipahir in its sense talks about a different thing. For example, the first one is dedicated to Mubarak Shah Khilji, the ruler who is the patron of the text, in whose dedication the text is being written, and it is a panegyric on Mubarak Shah that the first Sipahir is entirely about. So it is about Mubarak Shah in his praise, in his he talks about the auspicious moment of his accession, etc., etc. So this is the first Sipahir. The second Sipaher, or the second chapter, talks about Mubarak Shah's building experiments or building traditions. He talks about the completion of certain buildings that were done under Mubarak Shah that were initiated by his father Alauddin Khilji. And there is a reference to completion of Asar-e-Nau, that is the new palace under Mubarak Shah. And the second Sipaher deals with the praise of Delhi as the city. We know Delhi Sultanate was based in Delhi. Delhi was the capital. So there's again this praise of the city of Delhi, in which he himself lived and worked, Amir Khusro, and in which his rulers lived. So there is this dedication to Delhi and proclamation of its superiority over other so-called Islamic capitals of the time: Baghdad, Cairo, Khorasan. Everything is lesser than Delhi for him. The third Sipaher, which we are going to deal with in detail later on, is dedicated to the superiority and beauty of his country, India, that Amir Khusro identifies as his own. He himself identifies as a Hindustani in that sense. So this is a dedication to India, in which he gives various arguments ranging from how beautiful India's climate is to how intelligent India's people are. So he gives a vast range of arguments on why India is superior to every other country in the world. And he gives 10 arguments, among which include the innovation or invention of chess, invention of Panchatantra, and invention of zero in India, and how that is something that India has given out to the world, and why for that India should be held, in a super high esteem. And this last point that he makes about why India is so great is that he, the greatest poet of all times, was born in India. So this is an interesting thing when we need to understand the poet himself, how he looks at himself and how he looks at his own country. We'll come to the details of the third Sipaher, or the third chapter, later. The fourth Sipaher talks about the morning when he was, when he got this idea to write a work like that, like work like Noor Sipaher. And then he also includes certain advice to kings, to nobles in this fourth chapter. Further ahead, the fifth chapter deals with a hunting trip of the King Mubarak Shah, and he talks in great detail. Persian text of this time and of Amir Khusro's writing is filled with excessive praises, excessive exaggeration of things, beautifying things beyond how they were actually were. So this is all that's there in the text, excessive exaggeration. And in the sixth Sipaher, he talks about the birth of Prince Muhammad, the son of Mubarak Shah, and how there is a presentation of gifts to nobles on that occasion. The seventh Sipaher, talks about the season. He talks about the spring season in India. When we'll talk about the third chapter, we would get to know that he is in praise of Indian summer as well. He thinks Indian summer is the best weather of India, and there's like a good thing about Indian summer, which we would not be able to agree with, but still that is there. And he talks about other seasons as well, like he talks about the spring season in the seventh Sipaher, and in eighth Sipaher he talks about the autumn season, and further in the ninth Sipaher he talks about how how Mercury, the planet, whom he calls the scribe of the sky, the writer of the sky, paid him a visit, and how Mercury acknowledged the superiority of Amir Khusro to its own excellence. That means that Mercury accepted that it, as a scribe of the sky, was lesser than Amir Khusro. So this reflects that there was a consciousness, there was a culture that was very diverse, a culture that was very distinct from what we know today, or from what we think today. There are astronomical calculations that were put in place. Even the Muslim monarchs of the time believed strongly in astronomy and astrology, and like that continues throughout the Mughal period as well. So this is the culture that Amir Khusro is reflecting in its work, Noy-e-Sepeher, of 13th, 14th century India. This is about the different Sepeher, or the different sections of the work. And now let's come to the third chapter, in which he talks about uh, various positives of India. He praises India on various fronts, and there is a section in that chapter, in the third chapter, on India, where he talks about the Indian languages. Now, he talks about Arabic in that. He starts with Arabic in that sense, in that section, but we need to understand his consciousness to understand why he mentions Arabic. And he also mentions Persian and Turkish. But Arabic for him is the superior most language. Why? Because he is a believer of God, and he's an Islam follower of Islam. And for him, Arabic is the most, language of sanctity and language of the holy book, and that is why he cannot place any other language above Arabic, which he himself says in the end. The sixth Sepeher deals with the birth of Mubarak Shah's son, yes, Muhammad, right? So now the third chapter, when he talks about Arabic, he talks about how Sanskrit, when he mentions Sanskrit, when he talks about the Indian languages, and he also establishes great superiority of Sanskrit, and how beautiful a language it is, and how well how much knowledge is preserved in that language in India. But because Arabic is the language of the holy book, the language of Quran, so that is why he cannot place Sanskrit above Arabic, and that is the only limitation that he has. Apart from Arabic, he mentions Sanskrit, he mentions Turkish and Persian, and he talks about Persian in great detail. We know with the coming of Turks, and in Indian subcontinent, and with the Persianization of the Turkish court under Balban. So Ghayazuddin Balban, under whom he during whose time he had also joined, Amir Khusro had also joined service, was very impressed by the Persian culture, and it was his attempt, Balban's attempt, to Persianize the court. So he introduced Persian language, Persian customs, Persian names in his courtly culture, and that was a great reflection on why Persian is considered the language of culture and language of court. And according to Amir Khusro, Persian had penetrated the Indian soil so much that in every nook and corner, in every city, there was a dialect of Persian that was spoken by the people. So that is something that is of in interest for people to understand how languages evolved and how languages merged according to Amir Khusro's information. He talks about Turkish, and how Turkish, and then he talks about the grammars of various languages, grammar of Turkish and grammar of Persian, and he makes certain claims which might not be accurate, because he claims how some of these languages, like Turkish and like Persian, do not have a fixed grammar, and he might write that grammar. So that is something that is that can be put up to question. But the important part in the Indian context is that he is talking about the penetration of these languages to every nook and corner, every city, and that is something interesting about Persian. Then he talks about the languages which he considered Hindavi or Hindui, which means the languages belonging to the Indian subcontinent. And when you look at the languages that he's talking about, which we have already discussed in the beginning, there is a vast range, and this range reflects the India that we know today, almost the entire India that we know today. He talks about from west to east, so he talks about Gujarati, which he calls Gujari. Then he talks about Bengali. He talks about Gaudi, which is a dialect of Bengali language, which is spoken in the east. So this is the vast range from east to west, and from north to south. He specifically mentions Kashmiri, and he mentions Mabari, which can be understood to be Tamil because of the association with Malabar coast. And apart from these languages belonging to the four corners of India, he also talks about Sindhi, the language spoken in the area of Sindh, Lahori, associated with Punjabi like scholars have associated Lahori with Punjabi, Dwar Samudri, which is Kannad according to scholars, Telangi, which is Telugu, and Awadhi, which is the language of the northern Indian belt, which is spoken in Delhi and the areas around Delhi. So this is the classification of languages, of Hindavi languages, as Amir Khusro finds them and associates them with various regions of India. And Sanskrit. According to him, Sanskrit is the language of the scholars. Sanskrit is the language of the learned. And I already have talked to you about how he had huge praises for Sanskrit, but because Arabic was the language of his holy book, that is why he could not place Sanskrit above Arabic. So this is something that he talked about the languages. And when he talked about Indian culture, he praised Indians for their intelligence. He said that even common people here are very intelligent, very they have insight, they have understanding of things. This is something that he does not substantiate with any example, but he just makes these statements about Indian people and their greatness. And one very interesting thing that he adds about Indian culture is the ability of Indian culture to absorb other cultures and other people and make them feel at home, which is something that he might have himself experienced, because he was a second generation migrant and his father had come from from Central Asia, and his identity was not lost because we know he was associated with the Turkish lineage. So this is something that is important, because he calls India his country, and by calling India his country, he is asserting that India has this capability of making people coming from outside feel at home. He gives an example, he gives a list of people, for example, Khurasanis, which are Eastern Iranians, Arabs, and Rumis. If they come to India, according to him, Indians would make these people coming from outside, their own. And that is the nature of Indians, according to Amir Khusro, to help people and to make people their own. And that is what had happened with Amir Khusro himself, because he was a second generation migrant. And that is why probably he holds India in such high esteem, because that is the land that saved his ancestors from Mongol incursions, because obviously the parents of Amir Khusro had migrated from Central Asia because of the Mongol threat, which was ravaging the Central Asian lands at that point of time. And this is the country, this is the land which gave him home, which gave him identity. And this context, this historical context of the background where he came from and the home that he found in India might be or can be used as an explanation of why he looks at India in such high esteem, why he praises everything Indian. And this also points to us of how India was at that point of time. It was multicultural, it was receptive of other cultures, it absorbed other cultures, and not just absorbed, they mixed with each other and produced something new. So that was there, that was happening in India. And we can also look at Amir Khosrow in contrast with Al-Biruni, who was a scholar who came to India much earlier. He came with the migrating Muhammad Ghori in the late 12th century. And Al-Biruni also wrote extensively about India, about Indian culture, about Indian customs, about Indian languages. But the important difference between Al-Biruni and Amir Khusro is that Al-Biruni writes as an outsider. He looks at India from the outside, while Amir Khusro looks at India from the inside. And that is the very important difference, and that is a very important development that we can say had taken place in the course of assimilating Turkish population in India by the time we have come to Amir Khusro. And his personality, the multicultural personality that he had, where he was writing he was writing in Persian, he was writing in Hindavi, he was mixing these two languages, he was writing about God, he was also writing about the Hindu gods of the time. So he was mixing all these things, together, and he was a Sufi, and he was a court poet, and he was a historian, and these multiple attributes of Amir Khusro and the multiple characters that he had. For example, there was this title of Turku Allah that he had, and there is this other title that he has, which is Tutiye Hind. So now these two attributes belong to the same person. So that reflects India of that time, the multicultural, multidimensional, receptive, innovative, and the India that is of beautiful multicultural aspect, and that we can say was the earliest example. In Amir Khusro, we can find the earliest example of what we today know as the Ganga Jamuni Tehzeeb, and some scholars, including Irfan Habib, have associated him with the first patriot of India, because before Amir Khusro, no text has been written in any Indian language which praised India in this manner as Amir Khusro did, and Amir Khusro does in his work, Nur-e-Sepeher, the third chapter of it, and it is that is why this work has been called a patriotic work of sorts, and Amir Khusro has been called the patriot of the Indian nation. Despite being Turki Allah, he was a Tutiye Hind. So this is what we need to understand about Amir Khusro. I think I'll stop here. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you so much, Lubna. Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, thank you so much for the precious time. So I hope the students who are here today have made extensive notes on the information that you have given them, and I'll give them some time to go through it. And dear students, if you have any queries, any questions that you have, you can always email them to me or send them to me, and I'll also forward it to Lubna, and she may also, she'll also answer the queries and questions that you have. And students, I'll also forward you the email ID of Lubna ma'am, so that in case you have any other queries, extensive questions that you have, you may inquire from her. Thank you so much. I hope, the students, I'm very sure the students have enjoyed your lecture, and I have a lot. And after this, and after this, basically it'll make it very easy for us to move on with the actual text that we have at hand. And the third book, where we will be dealing with the ones that you have, the two chapters that you are mostly, that you have already talked about. Chapter number 5, where we talk about the languages of India, and also the 8th one, where we talk about the culture of the country and cultural excellence of the place. So we will end the lecture, the Zoom meeting here today. And again, students, we will meet tomorrow. And then we will also discuss, and we will go ahead with studying the chapter, the actual text that we have in the syllabus. Thank you, Lubna. Thank you for your precious time. Thank you so much. Thank you, students. Thank you.
I hope it was useful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.